I didn't see too many heads wobbling, but that's okay.
I know. It was in the 1930s, right?
Yeah. What I'm going to do, we have two survivors here from the valley. The lady in the green sweater, she lived in Enfield. Her father was the last barber in Enfield. I was born there, and I lived there. I left there very young, but young enough to remember what happened, and you'll hear my story. So consequently, I want to share all of this with you today, and they're going to put it on film. So this is important. Now, at the end of this, what I'm going to do is open the floor for questions, but there's going to be one of the people here that's going to come around with a mic, and wait till the mic arrives at your station before you ask your question. Is that understand? Is that okay? Okay.
You're going to find that one young man here is going to have a lot on his mind. Aaron Ross, he's going to have a lot of questions.
He looks like he's a professional. Is someone going to put the lights out when the time comes?
So Aaron, okay. You can hang up you maybe or whatever.
There's a reason for this. I'm probably breaking every rule in the book doing this, but ordinarily the room is dark. Oh boy, and I'm going to smoke everything up. Yeah. Okay, now you see this. This is meaningful. And I'm going to start it off before we do it. There's going to be a 20-minute slideshow showing different scenes in the valley. But beforehand, I want to bring this to your attention. This is nothing but an ordinary kerosene lamp. This lamp followed us from Prescott Ridge down into the valley floor in Enfield, then to various places that we lived in until today, and I still have it. So this lamp is at least 75 or 80 years old. Try to imagine sitting around a table in the dark, in the winter, early darkness, with 4 children sitting around a lamp like this, and a little old lady reading a paper, and everybody doing their homework and doing everything they had to do around a single source of light. It's hard for you to imagine, but it was a godsend because it was better than candles. This is one question. Does anybody know what this is? Because this came from the valley too. That's so that ladies can make themselves beautiful. They would put crinks in their hair, but to heat it up, you would put it in there till it gets hot. And then you would apply the heat to your curl, and it would permanently put a wave wherever you happen to bring this together. Isn't that clever? Yeah. Now you go to a beauty shop for that. But nonetheless, that followed us, along with the lamp, along with this musket, this fowling piece, which I'll talk to you about, and many other things. But at this point in time, I would like to do the slideshow and get that out of the way, and then we'll come back to me telling you about the different things I have to show you and talk to you about, okay? Excuse me, ladies. Mm-hmm. You know, lady. If there's any questions, save your questions until, I'll chat once in a while here, but I'm just going to zip through it. And if there's any questions, save them till the question period, if you don't mind. Okay, for the sake of talking, this is a map of eastern Massachusetts and central Massachusetts. And for the sake of what we're doing here today, this is the Quabbin Reservoir, this being Boston, and you're somewhere in between. This again is an enlarged picture of the reservoir, and I'm not going to try to explain, but our family lived all around that reservoir. We've lived here since the 1630s. This is a picture. You'll see that picture up front. You see where my laser light is pointing? You'll see that picture later on up there if you get in close. You can see all of the things. One thing that's prominent is you can see the roof of a barn on the highest point in Prescott Ridge. That was the barn at our farm. We're looking down into the valley floor at the town of Enfield, this being the town hall, the Methodist church, the spire to the Congregational church. You see the graveyard behind it, and the Swift River running along here. Again, that's another view of Enfield. You can see the various factories, a better view of the graveyard. It's a terraced graveyard. And if you go to the Enfield Lookout in the fall, early spring, you can actually see the top 3 terraces above the water line. So the water line is actually somewhere in this vicinity here. This is Main Street, going past, heading towards Greenwich, going past the Congregational Church. This is the primary road, and this is our town hall. We'll get back to that. This is the church in its earlier colors, quite early. And this is when somebody tried to modernize it. I think the earliest colors were nicer, but there you have it. I'll show you a different picture of that later. This is another nice picture of Mount Ram, along with the Methodist Church, Congregational Church, and so forth. This is one of the principal business blocks. This is called the Barlow block. I'll talk to you a great deal about this block and this one across here, and our little lady in the green sweater right next to, around the corner where you can't see it, was her father's barber shop. This is the other block adjacent to it. Now we're looking past that block and up through the crossroads. Road to Hill Street, road to Belchertown, and so forth. Our hotel, the Bartlett block again. This is a postcard. There are many, many, many hundreds of different scenes of postcards. The pictures were taken and they were sent to Germany. The Germans put them on postcard form, printed them, and sent them back to us. And some of them are quite wealthy. Not wealthy, they're expensive to purchase because such a period of time has gone by and postcards don't survive as a general rule unless they get into someone's scrapbook. Another overview of the town of Enfield. You can see, and these mountains you see now are presently islands because all of this is inundated underwater. This is the Rabbit Railroad going through here. I'll talk to you a little more about that. Again, this is a nice country view. Again, that's the road to Greenwich. This is the Grange Hall. The school was right beyond here, and I'll talk to you more about this. This is the town hall. Again, too, a nice scenic. You can see this is a farming community. Look how far you have to go between buildings to visit your neighbor in some cases. See, the buildings are kind of sparse down in the valley because you had good land down there, and you had some of the farms down there took quite a bit of that land and used it for farming. Overview of where I was born. This is Smith's Village of Enfield, Massachusetts. Mr. Smith's mill, and I'll give you more details on that later. There's a school here, and somebody famous was born in that house, and he's talking right now. Another pastoral view of Mount Ram. Again, we're looking down, which is following the railroad and the Swift River. I'll talk more about that later on. That's another view from Prescott Ridge looking down onto Smith's Village, Enfield. This is the old school. It's been abandoned by the time I came along. This is my grandfather, my mother's father's house. And if this were clearer, you could see him. He leans on the fence. He did an awful lot of that. He wasn't too ambitious and didn't work a lot. 36, the flood. This is not in Enfield, but it's in the valley floor. This is behind a blacksmith shop. This is the pond. Now what I'm trying to point out is there are many, many different things. Isn't this kind of an elaborate barn? Yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, I believe that's Linda Vista. If anybody knows different, correct me. They had a place for the people making the dam to go and dance, and they would date the local girls. And of course, the girls were in a tizzy to meet these refined people from Boston. And that snicker you heard was mine. But nonetheless, it was a nice place to go have a little recreation at a place where there wasn't a lot of it. We're looking up Bridge Street, looking back towards the Barlow block. This was Reither Warren's grist mill, and the Swiss River is running right under that bridge, and there's a falls right on the side here, and we'll see a better view. That's our firehouse. Just another scenic view. That's a nice overview of the town of Enfield and the surrounding hills. Again, Another. You're looking up the valley. Can you see the railroad here? This is Enfield, and this is a little hamlet called Smith's Village. That's where I was born. This is Mount Ram, right here. We'll talk more about that later. Another view of Mount Ram, and you can see the Congregational Church steeple. This is our depot. There were 2 depots in Enfield, one here, and there was a small depot freight station sort of thing in Smith's Village as well. This is an old picture, quite an old picture, but behind it, can you see these vertical posts standing upright with a cover over? Now, believe it or not, that's a covered bridge. What they did, they put the posts up, and then they covered that with planks, and it provided some protection for the wooden bridge underneath that the train passed, so that it wouldn't be destroyed as quickly in the wet and inclement weather. This is our inn, and this was up diagonally across from the Barlow block. And if you look carefully, you'll see the ladies are all up in this spot here on the 2nd floor. And here's the guys working really hard at it. If this were clear, you could see this guy is leaning against that vehicle. Now, this is 4th of July at the inn. Isn't that decorated beautifully? Now, you'll notice something else. The ladies are up here, and the ladies are crowded over here. And all the guys are lined up here. Now, none of you are going to guess why, but I'm going to give you a good reason. You see that door there? It leads right to the bar room. That's a German postcard showing the inn. This is the Potter School. If you go up to the picnic area here in the Quabbin by the Hanks farm, there's a road just as you enter the farm area where the picnic benches are, and it leads into the water. And about 150 to 200 yards into the water sits the Potter School, and that had 8 different classes, from 1 to 8, and 1 teacher. This is from up further north. This was a kiln for making charcoal, and that was up in the Dana Prescott area. This is our town hall. This is our premier building, and with the eyebrow lintels you see on it. And that was our pride and joy. That was one of the newest buildings in town. Now, the kids are going to school. At the town hall, yes. The 1st and 2nd grades went on one side, the 3rd and 4th on the other. And next door, which I can't show you now, I'll show you later when I get up. But this is the river as it runs behind the town hall. Here's the town hall still standing, and here's the valley floor as it's being destroyed and the buildings are being bulldozed and what have you. Usually anything man-made except stone walls. They left the dumps, but they removed most of the man-made articles. Again, we're looking at the remains of the old box factory, stone factory. You can see the town hall now. It's the top floors are gone, only the basement. This is Mr. Kimball's place up here, and the MDC at the time used that as a laboratory for testing water and what have you. Again, we're looking at the town hall. You can see they're salvaging the bricks, and a lot of those bricks went into local chimneys and foundations and various things like that. This picture is one of the towns, and that house is being dragged away. And literally hundreds of these houses were sold for very little money. Most of them were what they call post and beam. They could knock out the pegs, disassemble it, and they could move the frame. And quite a few of them went up into a town in Vermont. There's 25 or 30 houses built up there. A fellow made that a way of making an income and a livelihood by coming down and buying these buildings. Some of them as low as $2.50, taking them apart and taking them north of, I think it was Putney. Now this is an interesting picture. There's a house, and that's a horse. And this is a winch. You see there's a rope on it, and the rope is attached to that, and it runs all the way back, and you can't see it because it blends into the you can see part of it here. But it's hooked to the house, and the house sits on rollers. And the horse goes round and round, and as he does, he cranks up the winch, the rope tightens, and it pulls that house. And it'll pull it till the house is run out of logs to roll on. And then the workers will grab the back log and they'll run around, put it in the front, and they'll keep going, and that way there they can move the house into a position where they can jack it and move it by vehicle. Now this is a precaution. They were afraid the bridge couldn't take the weight of the house, so they put all these pylons beneath it to reinforce the bridge until they got the house across, and it's happy to say the house made it. Another view, you see the roads there? Any roads that were asphalt or tarred stayed that way, and they remain that way under the Quabbin to this day. That's the bridge, there's the falls. Remember I told you right there in Warren's grist mill was over here. I can't go into detail on what we call that river, but Grandpa had a word that I'm not allowed to use in public to define the river. And what he meant to say was that if it wasn't there, they wouldn't have taken our town. That was the thrust of his complaints. There's some engineering done by people up in Boston. You can see it's precise. There's the dam. They're building the dam. That was an amazing, amazing feat. And that's a story in its own right. I won't get into that today. But you can see the valley floor. Some of the roads still remain, a few of the buildings. But you notice the majority of them are missing. They're gone. This is the golf course. You can tell it's a golf course because there's all the sand traps. And look at the valley floor. But for people who have the illusion that there's houses under the water, and they are, and there's plenty of them, that disproves that. Another view. We're at Prescott Ridge now, looking down the valley, and you can see the road running through there, but you don't see any buildings. This is the lookout. This is the lookout, what's called the Enfield lookout. This is how it looked at one time. It looked like that when we were allowed to come back here and visit, and that was in the before the Second War was over, so that was before 1945 when we first came in here, and it hadn't filled completely, but it was almost full. The water was up, way up on this thing. It took almost 6 years to fill that reservoir. Of course, they were drawing it down through the tunnels all the time they were filling it, but nonetheless, it took a long time to top it off. This is Mr. Howe. Mr. Howe is in the post office. You see these boxes? That's the post office. Where you go on the other side. He had a little store on this side. You could go in the front door and go in there, but to get your mail, you went in the other side, and you would reach in from the other side and get your mail and pull it out. Or if you needed stamps, you notice there's no opening into the other area. Well, that gives him privacy to read his paper. But you'd lift your door and you'd speak, and he could hear you. You see, it's ventilated. And if you could order stamps or whatever you had to do. This is the parade, 4th of July parade. This is our last Civil War veteran. And that might have been my great uncle, because he was one of the last survivors of that war that was still active in Enfield. You notice these girls? They look like a bunch of hussies with those short skirts and what have you. And the fellow from Dana is very proud of his Belgians. You can see that, and his piece of equipment. So he posed for this picture. Don't know who he is, but at least we see him. That was a common thing. That was a common thing. Girls had to work like the devil, and boys had more time off. But they also added to the larder for the family for their meals, and you can see the evidence right there. This is a picture of all of the kids in the grammar schools from 1 to 8 in Enfield. And I had this picture for years on end, until finally one day I looked at this one here, and I'm right there, and I looked, and that was my half-brother. And they were playing a play, and everybody participated in it, and I don't know how they did that, but it was the Pirates of Pizan. If you don't know who it is, inquire from your teachers. They'll explain what that is all about. These girls here, you can see how busy they are. That's the Martindale farm. You can see these girls are hard-working field hands. Snicker, snicker. Here they are again. It took 4 of them to put a rail up on a fence. A 10-year-old boy could have done it easily, but nonetheless, there you have it. That's shared work. And there they are. They're ready to go haying. That was the most probably labor-intensive job that we had, and that was a farmer's burden to bear. If you look carefully, you'll see remember it's a depression. You'll see patches on their clothes and all the things that go with that. Well, that was a way of life at that point in time. Now this is a neat story. You see those boys, they're heading up Little Quabbin Mountain, and you notice the sleds. If you look carefully, you'll find 3 or 4 different makes of sleds running across a period of 30, 40 years in the making. And what they used to do, my dad told me this. I didn't see this, and I wish I had. But you see all the little saplings growing on the hillsides? He said that they used to all go up the hill, turn the sleds around, and instead of being someone sensible, they all came down at one time. And this one would hit a sapling, and then there would be an enormous pile up. And he said it continued. It just never stopped. It was cast into their brain. That's what you have to do. No one ever really got seriously hurt in that. Now these are kids coming home from school. Now, this is not in Enfield, but it portrays something very, very important. What do you see different? Anybody? You students in the front, make a guess. What do you see different that you don't see in your school today about their clothing? I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then you're going to fail. What do you see right there? You see bare feet. Well, you know, we were farm folks, and this isn't broadcast commonly, but we got 1 pair of shoes a year, and usually you keep those for the dry, cold weather. And the only day that you absolutely had to, if you were a farm person, had to wear shoes was on picture day, when everybody sat on the front steps of the town hall or in front of the school and had their pictures taken, and you dashed to show your neighbor that you didn't or couldn't afford a pair of shoes. And this is the final ball. The firemen had a final ball when they disenfranchised the town, and this was in April of 1938. And the end result was that it's crowded with people, but about half of those people didn't belong to Enfield or the Valley. This fireman's, some of the tickets got into Springfield long before they were provided for the people in town. So many of the folks in town would go to this farewell ball, and they'd crank open the windows, and they'd be out on the lawn, and they'd dance and have a good time out there, but there's no room for them inside. This is my grandma. And I'm going to read poems from this lady here when she became 17 a little later on. And this is Stella. Now, we had a lot of horses still. And Stella was a Morgan. And Stella was used to male voices, deep tone, bass voices. And when a woman with a more shrill voice gave commands, Stella didn't like commands from ladies. She obeyed men, but she didn't obey ladies. And my grandmother would get excited and her voice would get shrill. And Stella would then kick her traces. This is her traces, and she'd be on the other side of them by the time she got done. And there was nothing Grandma could do. She'd have to call a man, and he'd easily put her right back where it belonged. But Grandma was helpless. It was like a car with no tires. She couldn't move. This is your famous speaker and his 2 half-brothers up in Enfield on our farm. And I got long hair. Not because I wanted it, because it was cheaper than getting a haircut. This is a picture of all of our grandfathers and grandmothers, and the oldest man in the valley, and I'll show you more about him later, Wallace Hunter. And he's in the best room in our kitchen with my great aunts and great uncle, and the only permanent black man in the valley. And I'll tell you his story in a little bit. We're looking down the dam now into the reservoir, and it's beginning to fill. You can see the water is beginning to come up. Another nice view of the valley. This is an overview looking at the reservoir, and it's quite extensive. If you ever had a chance, you can see the islands. These are the mountaintops I was discussing a little bit earlier, and this is Prescott Peninsula, and you can see why it's called that, Mount Ram being at the end of it. Our farm sat right up here at the highest point. There's another picture. If you look to the front left, if you get a chance later on, take a look at that. Mr. Gardner's pictures furnished by Les Campbell are really nice. He's responsible for this slideshow you're seeing. He furnished these things for me some 14 years ago. And he put together this before and after scene showing 5 different scenes, and it's a wonderful thing to see and experience. So if you get a chance, go up and look at that after. we're looking at more or less the same thing, but you'll see we had a wonderful little town here. Now you see it. There's no houses. I'll tell you some tales of that either. And thank you for that, folks. And I'll...
Thank you for showing that to us.
Excuse me. Now, what I'm going to try to do is to try and explain some of the things that that happened. It was the end of the Depression. You all know what the Depression is? Are you all familiar with what the Depression is? Okay, that's when a lot of men didn't have work, a lot of men left home, and left the women to deal with the children. There wasn't a lot of safety net, and it was a hard time for everyone. To give you an idea of how hard a time it was, I have the town report here for the town of Enfield for the year 1933. Dr. Seeger was probably the most prominent physician we've ever had in that town. He was a brilliant man, and his job every year was to examine every student in the class and to report to the town the condition of those children. This is a sign of the Depression. See the effects it had on children, because the children were the last people to be denied anything. So you can see how far down the line it went. He said he examined 82 children. The number of children that had no defects was an 8. 8 children out of 82. 3 of them had serious nutrition problems. 2 of them had serious posture problems. 2 of them had a serious tooth problem. 72 had tooth and throat combined. 1 had nose problem, 10 had glands, and 2 had heart problems. So you can see the majority of the kids weren't on a diet that would sustain them over a long period of time. And remember, we're 4 years into the Depression when this report was published. So consequently, it gives you an idea of how the impact was on families. Now, can you imagine being in a situation like that, living on a farm all your life, and all of a sudden some power to be comes and says you have to go. Not only do you have to go, but your stores go, your churches go, your neighbors' houses go. Everything that you've known and loved is gone. Well, that's the effect that people like myself and people that were adult to me and my parents and grandparents and so forth. Now, where's Nim? Nim always asks for this, so I have to tell you this story before I go any further. I think he comes here to hear this. This is the pig story. This happened in our family. We had moved, the MDC had bought the farm. We had moved down into the valley floor, but we kept our animals on the hillside. We were allowed for a small fee, or a very generous lady, Marion Smith, would let us use her fields for our cows. Every day we would have to walk 1.25 miles each way up to service those animals and get them water and feed and so forth. Well, my grandmother, I was being raised by her. Remember, the men's disappear in a lot of homes. Well, my dad disappeared right away as soon as we were born, so he just cleared the field. He didn't have to have any responsibility. But the point is, my grandmother used to wear a bib apron, which was common for the older ladies in this point in time. And she came home, when she got nervous, she used to pick up the bottom and roll it up in her hands. And she did this one day, and it's all rolled up in her hands, and she says, "We got to go." And we were all excited, because we had never been anywhere. We never came down off the ridge until we moved downtown. We hadn't been to Ware, the next town. We hadn't been to Greenwich, the next town. So the end result was we found out we were leaving. We had to leave. And our job was to go back up on the hill, get the animals ready, and the Iceman from Mr. Mitchell from Warren was coming to pick up our animals and take them to a little farm in Warren that we didn't rent yet, but they were going to let us keep our animals there till we found a place to live. Well, nonetheless, up he came, and he had made a ramp with little cleats on it. We got the horses, the cows up there. We had no horses at that time. Stella was gone. But anyway, we got the cows up there, and we put the chickens up there in their little crates, and then we had to get the pig up there. Well, I don't know if you've ever tried to make a pig do anything it didn't want to, but you can't. So anyway, I became famous in my own mind anyway, right then and there, because they couldn't get that pig to go up. They'd try to steer it and get it aimed to go up the ramp, and it wouldn't cooperate. It just would not cooperate. So anyway, my idea, I went and got a bucket, and I put some ground corn in it, and I'd nudge him. Put a little in the front, and he'd be busy eating that, and I'd nudge him till his tail was pointed right up the ramp. A little more in the pail, and put it over his head. And he'd get a bite, and he'd back out so his eyes could see. And he'd go up one step, and up, and in a series of steps, until finally he was up at the top of the truck looking around, saying, I showed those guys, didn't I? He went on a ride to West Warren. He left the valley. As we came down the hill and into Ware, the stunning thing about it all, things you don't even think about these days, we went through the town of Ware, and his car is parked, pointing into the curb as far as you could see. And we went at noon, and here are all the people coming out of the mills with fine clothes, we thought. And they looked really wonderful. And as we rode through the town of Ware and headed off towards West Warren, you know, all of a sudden it struck us, you know, we were actually poor. We had no inkling. We had no inkling, because that was our lifestyle. That was how our neighbors were living. There were people who didn't live like that, but those were the big bugs. Those were people who had money and lived downtown. So anyway, there's the skunk story, Nim, courtesy of Nim. I'm going to tell you several stories as we go along, but I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Seeger. Dr. Seeger was our primary doctor. And if a woman had a child in the Quabbin, and there was a problem, he would deliver the child, say in Enfield, and then if he had a problem, he'd immediately send the child and the woman over to the Mary Lane Hospital in Ware. The end result was you'd get in the record, in the church record, you were born in Enfield. But when you got there, if you were born the same day, they would enter into the log you were born in Mary Lane Hospital. I have 2 birth certificates. I've been born 2 places. I have to be twins. I really have to. That'd be a terrible thing to wish on the world, but I'd have to be twins in order to satisfy that requirement. I do have copies of both birth certificates. Now, where we lived up on the farm for a while before we lost the farm. And we had neighbors up there. When we moved out of the valley, those neighbors followed us. These were farmers. They depended on exchange labor. They helped you, you helped them with their farm work. And we had our neighbors in Newberry's, and we had the Chapins. We had all these people living around us. So consequently, even though we left, we didn't leave all of our friends behind. The Newberry's lived at the end of our road, and they have a strange history, because the Newberry's lived right across the road from the end of a dead-end road in Enfield, way out in the country, about 3/4 of a mile from the line into Prescott. Newberry's moved up there, and the tax collector gone, but a new house, the site of the Newberry house. Well, he was puzzled. How did the house come from? Well, we knew where the house came from. They swiped it. But the fact remains that this was an interesting family, because these were woods people. They rarely went to town for anything. The oldest son did, but the most of the family didn't. And they lived off the whatever they got out of the woods. So the end result was that we had these boys on the loose doing their thing, whichever one is responsible for whatever. And they were led and guided by this little old matriarch, aunt, little tiny itty-bitty woman. She wasn't even 100 pounds, and these great big strapping men. And she would order them around like a drill instructor in boot camp. She would order them to do whatever they were supposed to do, and it was really hilarious to see that. And she had several, one of them was a cousin by the name of William. And William had a big black beard, and his hair was bushy and big, and he used to walk through town all the time. And on his arm he carried a big black crow. And Grandpa said, you be careful around him. You be nice to him. Don't ever say anything to get him mad. He had a reputation for being a barn burner. And if he had an argument or a disagreement with somebody, within a short period of time, they would lose one of their buildings to fire. So we always told him what a nice guy he was and how much we liked him and everything. You have to understand that. So the Newberrys, and they also had one that they called Unk. He was born with a distorted body, had a huge hunchback. And he used to, his sole purpose in life was to wander through the towns, all the towns, begging cigarettes and something to eat. So you see, we had characters everywhere. And we moved to Warren, he moved to Warren. He lived right behind us. We saw him every day out scourging through new territory. Now, I want to get off this a little bit and talk to you about some things about Dr. Seeger. Dr. Seeger was a really well-educated man, probably one of the best educated in the valley. And, you know, he tried to get the old farmers to come down off the hills and come into him, visit him, so that he could improve their health and make their lives more pleasurable and healthy. But he had difficulty doing it. But finally, he got some of the relatives to persuade him to come down to his office. And they would come down to the office, and he would ask them or tell them what they've got wrong, and he would say, "And what are you taking for this?" Well, a lot of problems were respiratory. They had trouble with the lungs and breathing and colds and that sort of thing. And they'd say, and this is true because we were subject to this. They used to take skunk oil. Doesn't smell. It's a layer of fat between the muscle and the skin on a skunk. It's yellow. It's a little darker than the color of this kerosene. And you would rub the chest with that and then put a hot towel on it and put you under covers. And the next morning, it was gone. And it worked. It did work. But he would say to them, "What are you taking?" They'd say, "Skunk oil." He said, "Well, I got something better." And he'd give them modern medicine prescriptions, or give them the pills. He'd open a little leather case and give them so many pills. And but he got into the commerce part of it because he hired my cousin, Freddie Brown, who's quite a bit older than I, and the two Potter boys to trap skunks and boil them down and furnish them with the skunk oil. And then he would sell the skunk oil for 25, 30 cents for a little vial of it. And so everybody made money on this. Well, one day, the three boys were coming back from Greenwich from a dance, and they didn't have to trap this skunk. Somebody had run over it in the road. So they took it and put it in the back. They had a Model A coupe that had a rumble seat. So they opened the back and they put the dead skunk in the back on the floor and closed the lid. They got up in the morning and went to rescue the skunk, and he wasn't dead. And he nailed him. He did. He did. They tried everything. You could try ketchup. You could try anything. Nothing worked. The scent followed them for ages. Well, after a week or two of trying, their little car was set out on the corner of Swift River Street with a for sale sign on it. They wanted $10 and nobody would buy it. They'd stop and look and leave. And for good and obvious reasons. You know, you couldn't sit in it to drive because it was a closed coupe. So they decided to have a sale, and they reduced it to $5. And a farmer from Greenwich stopped and he bought it for $5. But he did the sensible thing. He cut the top of it off, cut the back of it off, put a platform on it, and he would drive that through town. He would come periodically, once or twice a week, from Greenwich through Enfield, heading towards Ware or Belchertown. And the kids would see that coming, and you couldn't miss it because it was a different vehicle than we're used to seeing. And they would run along the road, and that was a big thing for them, and they'd run around the road holding their nose, screaming, "Skunk truck, skunk truck," and you know, poor guy trying not to look at them and avoid them. But nonetheless, that was a big deal for us because we didn't have all these little electric games you have to play and things like that these days. Anything that was humorous was pleasant. Now, we had in our kitchen, we had a Greenwood stove. It was what they call a range. You had an oven in it and all that. But our kitchen had originally been outside, and it had a well out right outside the door of the house. Well, they added an extension to the house and enclosed the well, and they put a floor in it. And so the end result was we would sit there in front of that stove in the wintertime or behind the stove And out of that well, periodically, you would actually see a snake come and go across that caused a lot of excitement because my grandmother was afraid of a mouse. And if she saw a snake, she'd run outside and screaming, and heavens knows, hopefully she had enough clothes so she wouldn't freeze to death, because it was a real disaster. It woke everybody up in the house. It sounded like a siren going when Grandma got upset. Anyway, a lot of the things I'm telling you, I learned because as kids, we were permitted to sit behind this big range when we had company, which would be the local farmers who'd come in periodically, every week or two. They'd all gather around and they'd talk, and this lamp would be the sole source of light. And so as long as we were quiet and didn't make a sound, we could stay there. And a lot of the tales that I've been telling you come from that exposure, from me being able to hear what they were saying. Now, to give you an idea, we were primitive people. We wore bib overalls, and we'd wear them and patch them and wear them and patch them until there was virtually nothing left. And you know what bib overalls look like? You know, you got two straps and you got a bib, and they're too big for you anyway. Well, when we went to Warren to live, we still were country folk from Enfield, and we carried all of our traditions and habits with us. And we were elected to go to first the Catholic Church, and then we moved on to the Congregational Church. And the end result was, when we went to the Congregational Church, they steered us to the back row in the church, and they had newspapers on the floor. And we would sit on a little bench there with the newspapers because we were farm kids. And before you went anywhere, you had to do the chores. You had to muck the animals and do all the things that you have to do on a farm. You couldn't let them go half the day without tending to them. And of course, they didn't want, if we went to church, we wore shoes. And you have to know that we couldn't carry that odor into the church onto their floors where it would remain. So we were kind of segregated. When it come time for a bath, we had 3 boys and 1 girl. And of course, the girl got her bath first. Never figured that out, but it's how it worked. And then the oldest boy right down to me, and I was the youngest. And by the time I got in, it was like pea soup. You know, I didn't bathe, I put a coat of dirt on, is what I basically did. But that was how we did it. We had a great big copper boiler sitting on a stove, and it would heat it up, and then 2 people would grab the handle, set it on the floor, and there it was, right out there in front of God and everybody who took your bath. You learn not to be modest. Now, I want to take a minute. This is a little lady. She was 17 years old when this picture was taken. Her name is Elizabeth Rand. There was no father in that home either. There was 2 girls and a young baby boy. She wrote beautiful poems. When she left the valley, she was one of those people who could not let go. And she entrusted me with a lot of the things that she wrote. She wrote essays about how bad she felt being a young girl who couldn't walk along the stream where she came from with her first boyfriend, how heartbroken she was that somebody had done this to her, and things of that nature. I want to read this one thing that she wrote, of the many things that she wrote. Her name is Elizabeth Rand, from Enfield, Massachusetts, November 16th, 1927. This is the year the Exodus started, where we had to begin to leave. They knew it was coming. It was like that book, Someday. They knew it was coming. Okay, I'm going to bear with me now as I read this. The title is Reflections. Before me stretches the valley, which sooner or later will be the famous Swift River Reservoir, as deep and as wide as the sea. Soon we'll see no more these hilltops, trees and flowers, homes and crops, streams and meadows, children playing round the dooryards, mills and shops. Many of the games of childhood played about the old home door. Many of the scenes of gladness, oh, to be in days of yore. Memories of our loves and of our pleasures, of our sorrows and our woes, of our gains and of our treasures, of our friends and of our foes. Think of all it used to be, and we did not love it then. Here's plead, but all in vain, for the days that once had been. Now they're going. We'll remember springtime pleasures, summer joys, winter snows, cold December, Thanksgiving feasts and Christmas toys. All the sunshine and the showers, all the walks and buggy rides, the birthdays of our babies and the weddings of our brides. If it's only human nature, let us take it with a smile. Give the best we've got to Boston. That may help her for a while. It may help her to keep her children clean and happy, perhaps strong. When she takes it for a purpose, perhaps God won't think it wrong. As we look out over the water, we can tell folks where and when we laughed and loved and frolicked in the days that once had been. 17-year-old girl wrote that. Isn't that a wonderful poem? Zeb Pierce is the president of Swift River Historical Society. She publishes a little magazine periodically. And she put in one thing. She summed up a lot of the feelings that us folks that lived there felt. And here's what she writes, and it's very short. She writes, quality of life is not always measured by how many dollars you have in your pocket. The joy of living, which is in your heart, is what counts. To be very young, it didn't matter. To the teens, it meant prospect for a more exciting life. The real impact, the real sufferers were the family providers and the elderly who had lost their security, their sense of belonging. They couldn't go back. All must leave. It was like a death sentence. Very nicely done by this lady. Now, I had older brothers and older sisters. And there's a J.R. Green that makes a calendar every year. I don't know if you know of him or not, but some of you folks probably do. And back in 2004, this lady came to the picnic and says, there's somebody by the name of Wilder in the catalog. You'll have to look at it. It was in September, so I went in September and got it, looked at it. There's the school right next to the town hall in Enfield, down in the valley. Now let me read what it says. This was the last school to close in the doomed Swift River Valley. It was located next to the town hall in Enfield. A graduation ceremony was held for 7 students from the school at the town hall on June 22nd, 1938. An official of the state Grange spoke at the event. This view taken earlier that year shows Joseph Wilder III and his sister Mary standing in front of the school. That's my brother and my sister. I didn't know about this until just 2 or 3 years ago. Show you the impact on people. Here is the Boston pictorial, and this is May 15th, 1938. Shows a picture of, this is all the neighbors. This fellow here, Wallace Hunter, he is our closest neighbor heading to Prescott, and here he is right here. Wallace says, Wallace Hunter, 86, Enfield resident for 85 years. He lives with 13 cats. He says, I have no place to go. There was no safety net. Nobody was looking after you. There was no pot of gold to help you on your way. Make this interesting. To put it in perspective time-wise, this is our fleet, our modern fleet of aircraft, the DC-3s, which were prevalent back in the 1930s. These ladies, these elderly ladies here are really going to be excited. Look what you could get for $3.95. Take your choice. Could you imagine going into a clothing store today and buying anything for $3.95? Now this is the sad part. This shows them digging up the grave, some of the last dance, various pictures of the Quabbin, the Soldiers Memorial next to the town hall. And to put things into perspective, here's a picture made here, made at the request of the king. King George not only asked to have this picture made on the occasion of Princess Elizabeth's 12th birthday, he also requested that Margaret Rose be included in the picture. This is Queen Elizabeth of England when she was a child. So that puts it in perspective, and you can date it based on that. Now, friends of ours, friends of the Quabbin, friends of everybody was Lucille and Harry Thresher. These were the last couple to be married in the valley. They were married at the Exodus when we were leaving. They were married in, I think, 1938, the end of 1938. So consequently, her sister had the last baby born in the valley. And my grandma says she used to come walking down from Weber Road with her stroller with her new baby in it, showing whatever few people were left what she had done. And she was so proud, and she was so proud to share it with everybody. Now, when we lived in the valley, and this is courtesy of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they have a wonderful archive of the houses there. And this just gives you an idea. I'm going to show you a few of the houses that belong to our family. This was my grandmother's boarding house. She inherited that when her sister got killed. This here is my grandpa's house. There's the old schoolhouse right behind it. Remember, he's the guy that leaned against the fence a lot? That was his house. This is the house right across the street from that nice boarding house I showed you. This end of the house, two families lived in this house. This is where somebody very famous was born. His hand is raised in front of you now. And this is our farm, built sometime right after 1830. This is our farm. This is the addition they put on it. The well is inside. That was our woodshed. And this was our barn across this street. And I have all kinds of pictures, but when you come, I'll share these with you if you want to see them. They'll be right up here. Incidentally, when this is over, anybody that's interested can come and look at whatever I got here. Just please don't take it home with you. A lot of newspaper articles were being written about what was happening here. And the town of Ware was very negative. They sent a notice to the State House saying that they didn't agree with this whatsoever. All kinds of effects. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are old people and how brokenhearted they were to have to leave their homes where they lived their entire lives. Our family was so attached to it that they kept everything that showed up. And I just opened a book here a few days ago, and here's a 1935 article showing the depots. And they talk about 11 Boston Albany stations will soon pass. The reservoir will erase whole towns. It erased 4 towns and 7 hamlets, 7 little parts of towns. Somebody's interested later, I'll read off to who they are. Oh, you were interested, then I'll read to you. The towns were Enfield, Prescott, Dana, and Greenwich. But the little hamlets we had, and we only named the 7 largest ones, was Doubleday Village, Packardville, Smith's Village, where I lived, Millington, Puppyville, Greenwich Plains, and Bobbin Hollow. Each one of those names means something to some people who lived in that area. I'm not going to get into that either, but I just wanted to let you know the effect it had on people. There was only about 2,500 people that was displaced by that time because the populations had dropped dramatically as the businesses moved out of town. I showed you that picture of our farm with the woodshed in it. Up over the top of the woodshed, we had a man who floated around town constantly. He was about 45, 50 years old at the time when we had to leave, and his name was Bill Carrington. And he used to spend the winter up there, sleeping on pieces of boards wrapped in a blanket. He'd get some heat up through the attic, but very little. But that's where he lived, because he had no place else to go. He just wandered around and did chores for people. At any rate, in the wintertime, we always had a lot to do, because before winter, when you got into autumn, we burned wood. And we had to put in 15, 20 cords of wood a day, a season. And 15, 20 cords of wood, a cord of wood is 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. So you realize that's quite a stack of lumber. The senior people would go out and would chop the trees and chop them to size 8-foot lengths. We would tie a rope harness around our neck and under our arms, tie it to that, and we would lug that, sometimes a half a mile. We would, wherever the wood lot is, and we had a wood lot going down Prescott Ridge, we would lug that up and drop it off, and then the older people would make the piles for us. So that was our chore. That was one of our primary chores all through the fall. Our neighbors, I showed you He was in this picture here. I didn't learn about this story until this sweetheart told me this story about them. They lived, the first house on the left heading in towards Prescott, still in Enfield, but right on the line. And that was Wallace and Augie. Augie was his sister, and Wallace. They lived in a beautiful... The end result with them was they never married. They used to get what they call $1-a-day kids, because there was a lot of kids without parents, and the mothers couldn't deal with all those kids. So some of them, they would sort them out, and they would go off as state children. And if you could work, then the state would rent them to you for $1 a day. The rent is in reverse. They would pay you $1 a day for their care and maintenance. You feed them and clothe them and tend to them. And for that, you would get all the work out of them that you possibly could. And we were $1 a day kids for a while, until I found out my grandma was making money doing it, because she got $1 for every one of us kids, and there was 4 of us, so she was really a rich woman, but we didn't know it. But at any rate, the $1 a day kids were running their farm, and one day they didn't have bathrooms like we do now. They had an outhouse, and Augie went to visit the outhouse during the storm. It was raining, and lightning hit the outhouse, and she never went in it again. She sent Wallace down the hall store, and he ordered a crockery pot, which was a lot of money in those days that you didn't have. And from that point on, she had that underneath her bed, and that was her facilities, because she would never dare to go in that outhouse again. Harvey Dickinson tells me about an onion man out in Greenwich Plains. They ran a little store out there. I'm going to have church, a congregational church, and this was set afire. A lot of buildings were burned by boys wandering around the valley floor, and up on the hill they burned Marion Smith's, whose father built Smith's Village and had the factory there. They burned her summer cottage. You can see the church afire, and it's spooky because you're looking at the Soldiers' Monument highlighted in the flames and the smoke. And this is a picture courtesy, this fine outfit that's helping me here today. Now, anyone of you ever hear of Governor Weld? Somebody has. You know who Governor Weld is? He was the governor of Massachusetts for some time. And he called one day and he says, I'm writing a book. He says, I want to come out and see you. I said, fine, I'm glad to have the governor. And they had police on both sides of the street, and so he was safe enough, and he came, sat on my back porch, had tea, threw Nancy out of the house. She had to sit out in the yard, and he talked to me, and he made something in the neighborhood of a dozen half-hour tapes of our interviews on the Quabbin. Now here's a picture of Governor Weld talking to me in my front yard, and talking to the Historical Society lady, too. And then he told them all they were dismissed. He had business, and business was with me. I felt pretty important for 30 seconds till I got help from all these people. But the fact is, he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book on the Quabbin. Now, he's the governor, seated governor. He says, I'm going to write a book on the Quabbin. He says, first and foremost, I'm going to write a book on the planning of it. Secondly, I'm going to write a book on the financing of it. And third, well, that's going to be the second part of it. The third part of it, I'm going to interview 2 or 3 people who live there, and I'm going to combine that to give the personal touch. So when he wrote it, he sent me a copy of the book. Well, if you see it on the shelf, just walk past it, because he made a novel out of it. I don't know how to say this, but what he did, he made my grandfather, my uncle, made my grandmother a pious lady, and she was hell on earth. This gives you an idea how far it went. He made me a 15-year-old boy that had an affair with a 17-year-old state girl. He did all kinds of stuff that never happened, but he did not use most of the information I gave him on the things that I'm telling you now. He did not use that in this book. And then he called me on another book he was doing. And I had somebody send him a clipping, but I didn't get involved, because to be burned once is enough. Now this, I got to show you this. You know what this is? This is a fowling piece. It can't be loaded, it can't be shot, so you're safe. And if you fall asleep, I'm coming after you. Little girl looks guilty. You're just resting your eyes, I know. This is a fowling piece. The reason I brought this, it plays a very important part in the history of my family in the Quabbin, and expands across 5 generations. I inherited this when my dad died, and that was in 1980. And I kept this, and I hung it up, and I had it in our den, and it sat there. That's we call it my Enfield room, because that's where my artifacts are, because I still have one. And one day I decided to take it down. I was going to take it all apart, clean it, and do everything I could to preserve it so it'll last. I took the butt plate off, and he had drilled a hole into the stock, and there was a linen piece of paper in there. And I pulled it out, and in there he had made a listing. And this was my great-great-grandfather. He says, Josephus Wilder, Wendell, Mass., 1847. Repeated the name, says Enfield, Mass., 1857. And then my great-grandfather, Arthur's name was in there, and it includes his date. And then his son, which is my grandfather, and then my father. And I come along and I said, well, I lived there, and I saw that gun, and I touched it. So I put my name on it and put it back in. I never pull it out now because I'm afraid I'll tear it all to pieces. But this is 5 generations of a family. You stop and think how many years. Total from the time that he listed it until the present day is more than 150 years. So that's quite significant in its own right. And it's a surprise. It's a surprise, like when I open the book and find these sort of things. Now, there's also a very sentimental thing about the valley. This is a nice story, and I was invited to attend, and I did. Nancy came along. Wedding site to recall the lost Quabbin town. All of this happened up at the tower on Quabbin Mountain. And it says here, it goes into a lot of things about the Quabbin Reservoir, which you already know. But it says, for senior citizens like Judith Labinski of Springfield, 76 years old. Now this goes back about 10 years ago. And over the years she passed on stories. She grew up in the lost town of Enfield. And over the years she passed on stories of her childhood to her children and her grandchildren. Now she's got the satisfaction of going back there with her granddaughter, who had these great attachments to her grandmother's stories. She's going back to the vanished community to be married. And here's a picture of her and the grandmother and the mother. And so she did. She went up there, and it was a great event, and there were many people. There was probably 50 people up at the tower that were witnessing this wonderful young lady and her grandmother. And her grandmother also brought along her Bible that was presented to her in 1935 by the Congregational Church. There's the little nameplate in it where they made this gift to her. And she shared stories with her, and it was a wonderful, wonderful event to be able to see this attachment this other lady had with that part of her past. Now, this is Smith's Village. Many, many years ago, there used to be a lady, Lois Barnes, who did a lot of work here. She was involved in the Friends of Quabbin or what have you. When she found out that I lived in Smith's Village, she asked me if I would make a notation of everybody that I knew that lived in Smith's Village. So I got a picture of it. And of course I got my grandmother's house and the house I was born in. And there's my grandpa's house. If you look on a clear day, you can see him leaning on the fence. But this lists everybody who lived there. Okay? Now, other than an overview map that the people here have, this is probably the only effort that I know of that somebody identified all of their neighbors that they knew and remembered at a point in time. Now, they were farm folks. My grandfather lived in Enfield. They listed this under 1912 in Prescott, but it wasn't. It was in Enfield. It was on Prescott Ridge. It gives you an idea how these farmers interlocked and why they had to move, why they looked for each other to settle close by. It said here, several neighbors with teams met at Joseph Wilder's to do some planting for him. Mr. Wilder had been laid up for some time with tuberculosis of the knee joint. You stop and think, the neighbors came, here's a farmer that's disabled. He didn't solicit, they just got together and went and did his work for him so that his farm life could continue. That's an endorsement on the type of people, a hardy New England stock that was here. Now, this is a good description of NIM. The book written on the town of Prescott, 1914 in Prescott, Mass. For a teacher, it's going to be a she, although they had he's. So if I say she, I really meant he. She must not be highty-tighty. This is the advertisement and the qualifications they need. She must not be highty-tighty. She must buck the fashions and wear long dresses. Remember I told you about the hussies watching the parade? Well, she can't be like that. No hussies in our school. She was never seen in normal school, and she should have a proper chin. He fits the qualification. He has a very definite proper chin. He needs a goatee on it and it'll be more proper. He must have passed the giddy age. In other words, she had to be over 30. She ought to know intuitively any of the physical defects of the pupils. And she had to have a piercing eye. One glance should do it all. I've had teachers like that all the time. She must have severe facial expressions that would squelch even an incipient thought of disorder. That's an advertisement in the local paper for a teacher for Prescott. How many of your teachers would qualify? Now, I'm going to have to end this pretty soon. I want to read one thing. This is out of the senior class. Senior class, my father used to go to Athol, the school. He'd go on, they'd catch the train, the Rabbit. It was called a Rabbit because it made 19 stops between Springfield and Athol. So it was always making the hop. He said it was interesting because on a nice warm day, they would stop and the kids would go out and pick flowers for the teacher. The train would stop and let them off and then go pick flowers and so forth. In the wintertime, no. They'd get on a train and they would come like hell back because they were farm folks and they had to get home in time to do their chores. And it was dark early. Well, finally, they built a high school in Belchertown that would accommodate our Enfield people. This is a senior class album, and it talks about, it's called The Echo, and it talks about 1927 and what they were experienced. Now, I want to read one more thing to you that a young girl, just graduating, her name is Madeline Haysart. She writes this little epistle for this magazine. That's her parting shot to let people know how she feels about what's about to happen. The Swift River, as you know, runs through the towns of North Dana, Greenwich, Prescott, Pelham, and Enfield. It forms part of the boundary line between Belchertown and Enfield on the east. It is a beautiful river with many curves and bends, the many branches and the tributaries, the little streams in from pleasant dells through fertile farms. It is a swiftly flowing river, hence its name. The Swift River is undoubtedly one of the loveliest in this state. But a need has arisen, a necessity to satisfy the growing demands of a great city. And this beautiful river, the nestling ponds, the long-established homes, the cherished cities of the dead, all that American culture, ideals, and civilization cherish and mature must be laid to waste, be uprooted, be destroyed, and be utterly removed from this section. All save the water, for that must remain. About 40 years ago, the project was first discussed, but more important questions arose, and this one was dropped. It would be brought up again at intervals, but nothing definite was done. The people of the valley did not believe it would ever happen. They regarded it as idle talk. When the final decision was made, it came with surprising suddenness. The first feeling was of bewilderment. On all sides could be muttered, "They won't do it, they can't make us." The Ware River was first proposed. Ware is dependent on the great measure on its mills. Those gone, Ware business is gone, the town would be merely a husk, a shell of its former self. Opposition grew steadily and successfully, that the attention then was focused on the Swift River. The bill for taking of this river came before the legislature. It was only after the bill was passed that people realized they would have to leave their valley. More surveys, planning, and so forth. Surveyors on the Swift River, 3.5 miles below Enfield, surveyors and engineers completed the necessary drilling, and white stakes and a slash up the hill of a knoll showed where the dam would eventually stand. Towns to be taken are Enfield, Greenwich, Prescott, North Dana, and even part of Belchertown. You all know these towns. You know that Enfield lies between Mount Quabbin and the western hills, and once had beautiful drives, well-kept cemeteries, homes and surroundings, and well-kept public buildings. Greenwich spreads out over a more level section of the plain, and the village banked by hills is one of the many types of towns we like to see in this non-too-thickly settled section of New England. North Dana, thriving and well-located, breathe forth activity, life, vigor, intensely New England. There is Prescott, on whose summit plays the morning and the parting sun, coloring the apples and graciously smiling on a sturdy race, whose removal is now to go to ruin. Buildings which have been deserted by fire have not been restored. People have been situated and they're sitting back waiting because they did not know what to do. Now about 10% of the population in these towns has made preparations to leave. Some have already gone. Some have gone to make new friends and found new homes. Where prosperity once reigned, ruin threatens. You've read of the meetings held to discuss the situation. You know how these towns have been represented in Boston, how they've tried to get a fair adjustment of damages. But what is fair adjustment? Do mere dollars satisfy? No. Yet that is all that can be done, a mere dollar reparation. People of Boston have not thought of the situation the same way we have. You see, even back then, they were slamming people from Boston because they were losing something near and dear to their hearts. And I got to tell you something, it took me almost 60 years to come to grip because my family were so negative about this, and it lasted. They were farm people, and it lasted. And finally, I recognized the fact it was important because there were people that had families and babies and all the things that necessary to require water. So somewhere, someone had to give, someone had to sacrifice so that someone had an advantage. I'll go on and finish this. They say we're asking too much for our property, but no matter what they pay us, they can never make suitable recompense. Can these people take a few paltry dollars that these homes bring and go elsewhere, buying anew, get anything at the price they can pay that will anywhere near approach what they're forced to abandon? A home is built, grown into, tended, and cherished with so much that goes into our lives that money cannot buy and it cannot restore. Can this be replaced? No. But we know how people have been driven forcefully out of other countries, how ruthless they have been swept out. Read Evangeline. We are so utterly unlike them. There is no family separation, at least of the living. No loss of life, no destruction of property without at least partial reparation. But there are ties of friendship, townspeople, neighbors, schoolmates. The mills of the gods have been set in motion. It is only a matter of time till Massachusetts' version of the exile from Arcadia takes place. Some of this feeling must be in the hearts of the people who are now depressed and dispossessed of their properties. Yet there are many in the valley who are glad that the die has been cast, the Rubicon crossed, the Gordian knot cut. Since the thing must happen sooner or later, better to end all uncertainty and anxiety with one sharp cut. Let the decision be made quickly, and we will act accordingly, is the sentiment of most of the residents of the valley. So life goes, tragically mastered, grief-controlled, and disciplined. But underneath the calm face lies an aching heart and a wounded soul. Step by step, this drama moves towards its close, a pageant of many moods, but one theme, the eternal conflict between the old and the new, the struggles between the needs of the many and the rights of the few, the endless enigma of human existence. That's pretty darn good for an 18-year-old girl. That's pretty darn good. Pretty thoughtful. She put a lot into it, and she expressed a lot of the feelings. Now, at this point in time, because of the time, we're going to have to stop, but I'm going to have a question and answer period, and there's a gentleman that's going to go around with a mic, and speak into the mic, and I'll try to answer whatever I can. Anyone have questions? If so, raise your hand.
Yeah, I have a couple.
I've been warned about you, you know.
So as a class, we wrote some questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite memory living in the Swift River Valley?
Oh, well, let me tell you that. Living there, living on a farm and not knowing any different, those were the happiest days of my life. I've experienced chances in my life to travel this entire world. And I'll tell you this was probably the happiest time that I had ever spent anywhere. And it wasn't until I saw the impact that it had on the elderly people in my family that I began to feel the grief that they had, and then it began to subtract from those very happy times.
And when did you first learn about the building of the Quabbin Reservoir, and where were you?
Oh, well, we were living on a farm, but the Massachusetts had bought the farm, but we had certain rights, so we could leave our animals there for a small fee and feed them and so forth. And we moved downtown into vacant houses down below. But that was in 1927, which I don't remember. 1927, Prescott people began to leave in numbers, great numbers, until it was almost vacated by the time that I realized what was going on in the world. But we grew up knowing that it perhaps might happen. But Mr. Sawyer was our representative, and he lived in Ware, and he kept telling the town fathers, they're not going to take, particularly the land that's out of the watershed, they're not going to take that. You're safe. Right until the end, when they appointed a committee locally, and they showed the lines where the boundaries are going to be, and the end result was, it was horrifying. And he was approached by the town fathers, and he said, well, that's the legislature. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'll tell you what they did about it. He'd been running for office since 1916 and won every year. That was the last year when he made those comments that he ever got elected again. So he paid the price for he probably was very well aware of what was going on, but he would not share it with people because he had too many elections to run between the time that this started and it ended. Do you see? So it was political.
As a child, not from your parents' point of view, what was your initial reaction towards
Well, I told you that. That was on my pig story.
Yeah.
I was shocked because, and then we realized we were poor. That was my first realization that something really serious had happened.
Or did you attend the Enfield farewell ball?
Oh no, I didn't. I would be a nuisance then. But members of my family did. But they had to be lower class because they were out on the lawn. But they had a good time. It was very enjoyable. That's it?
No. We have. I'm trying to find ones that you didn't answer.
Okay.
Does anyone else have questions while I figure?
Yes, I do, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, never mind.
Oh, yes, sorry.
How well do you remember when the towns were around?
How what?
How well do you remember the towns when they were around?
I can't say towns, plural, because I had never been to Greenwich, and I had never been to Ware, and I had never been to Prescott, and I lived a mile from there. We were farm kids.
Oh.
Okay, but I remember Enfield like it was yesterday, because everywhere we went on Shanksmere. You know what Shanksmere is?
Yes.
That's your shoes, your feet. We didn't have shoes, so we went barefoot. But that's where we went, and that's what we knew, and that's what and I remember so many people who lived there, and each one was their own character, because every time you met somebody, it was like watching a new TV show. You got all kinds of new characteristics that showed up in these people. Some of them were funny, some of them cursed a lot, and you tried to mimic them, and you get punished, and you remember that. You know, all these neat things that you don't think about a lot these days.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
I think during your presentation you actually answered all of our questions.
I anticipated you were, Neil warned me. Yes, ma'am. Uh-oh, somebody's been roped.
I was just wondering, I've heard mention of the Grange Hall, and I'm actually a member of the Grange. So I was just wondering if you were a member, or your family was members of the Grange, and what the Grange was like at that point.
I'm a fifth-degree member of the Grange, and then I got old enough to not do the sixth and seventh. However, I did ride the goat. That's
Me too.
meaningful to you? And the Pomona Grange was a very important part, too. And a social thing, and it was a thing for people to get together, because after the town broke up, the people that were in the Grange joined other Granges, and those people would drift towards one another. And the Methodist Church that sat in Enfield is now the Grange Hall in Palmer, Massachusetts.
Oh, really?
Yes. Any more?
Bob, just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
One is, I find myself really interested in that Enfield Town Hall as a building.
Yes.
You know, it really stands out when you see all the photographs of the
That was
of-
our
of the
primary
town.
building.
It's a remarkable big building, and you just told us today that how the kids actually went to school in that building.
That was the first 4 grades went there.
So now, do you remember the inside of that building? Do you,
Yes, I remember. Well, no, I don't remember the whole inside, because where the big bugs were. These are the office officials.
Yeah.
The big bugs, we crept past those people. But no, I remember where the first and second grades were.
Yeah.
And I can't remember my teacher's name. I remember everything else, but I can't remember her name. And I've tried desperately, and Mr. Howe showed up. He was son of Donald Howe at the last picnic, and he named he had the same teacher, he was in the same class with me, and he named, and I can't remember her name. So I'm desperate for our next picnic, hoping he's going to show up. But yes, I remember that much of it. But we were downstairs.
So you never went upstairs? Was the big hall where they had the ball actually upstairs then?
Yeah,
Yeah. You probably weren't up there.
I didn't go up there.
They wouldn't
No.
have school assemblies up there or anything.
Never heard of that
No,
then,
no.
no.
Just curious as to, that would be where the town meeting would be held,
Yes,
probably, right?
yes, sir.
Where they had the farewell.
That'd be an auditorium, yes, sir.
Another question we had, this actually came from someone who works in the cafeteria at Eagle Hill School.
Mm-hmm.
She was curious in our list of questions, and she added one that I thought was very evocative. She said, knowing what you know now, all these years later, is there one thing more than any other that you miss about your home in the valley?
Oh, my Lord, that's it. There's not one thing, there's so many things. It led to my core, my family's core. We lived there, that was our survival. And to have it taken away so abruptly and having no choice or no say in it, that was like tearing out a piece of your heart. That's how best I can describe it. Like I say, it took 60-odd years to decide that it was really a pretty good thing they did. It's something very necessary. Yes, sir. Anyone else? Last chance. You're going to have to go back to school, you know. Nothing else? Okay, well, listen, I want to thank you very much for coming. And I have many more things to tell you, but this gentleman that's running the camera has to scoot out of here and get his youngster and from school. So we'll end this, and I thank you very much for your patience, and thanks for coming. Next time I'll have a whole bunch more stuff for you. You ready to come back and get another day off from school? Yeah, you got a big smile.